Welcome to a very quick and very easy introduction to tvOS or Apple TV. Now what we're going to create in this quick introduction is a very simple app that shows one image and shows a different image when we swipe right and shows the original image when we swipe left. Now it's that simple because I just want this to be a very gentle introduction for you. Please note that you should have done a little bit of programming before because I'm not going to go discussing what I'm doing in terms of programming. So if you haven't done any before, then please take my iOS Starter Bronze course first, and then you will be absolutely fine with tvOS because the systems are very similar, if not the same. Right? So please do that before you carry on with this app. So there you can see the app running on the simulator. And what are you going to learn whilst you make this? Well, first of all, I'm going to run through the basic app overview, how to create the app, what the files are that are created, what each of them does, just as a very high level, bird's eye view. Then we're going to learn how to link the storyboards, which is the place where we develop the graphical part of our app, to the code where we actually put the main plumbing of our app. We'll also look at how to show a very basic image, obviously. And this is fairly easy. We'll look at how to also link the image view, it's called, to our code. And also how to change an image on a remote swipe. So how to set an image programmatically, first of all, and then also how to subscribe to the remote controls coming in from the Apple TV remote. So if all of that sounds good and fairly doable to you, then we'll also add a little bit extra. We'll add a couple of user hints that change depending on which image we're looking at. And this just helps the user interface of our app. So if all of that sounds good to you, then let's go. Right, let's make our very first tvOS app. Now, in this lecture, you can follow along with the first bit, create the first tvOS app. And then following that, I'm just going to do a little review and an overview of all the files and folders that are created, just skimming the surface. Now, once you've created the app, if you've done iOS app programming before, if you've taken my courses, Starter or Bronze on iOS, then you can skip the file overview part. So just create the app and then skip the overview because the file systems are pretty much, if not exactly, the same for both systems. Right, so open up Xcode and let's create a tvOS app. Righto, let's get started. Of course, as always, open up Xcode and create a new Xcode project. Now, because we're targeting a different platform, which is actually based on iOS, I believe, we have to select one of these icons at the top. So we've got watchOS, we have tvOS, macOS, and we have a cross-platform version. And this is mainly used for games because you don't want to rewrite your code across everything. So let's select our tvOS, and you'll notice we have single view, we have a game, we have a tabbed app, and we have a tvML app. Now, what is a tvML app? Well, in a strange way, it's kind of like a hybrid app. I'm sure you've heard of these app development frameworks that basically embed a web page into an app and then develop your code in JavaScript, and then your code goes into that web browser, and for the most part, they're actually quite good these days. They didn't start out that good. They started out quite rubbish. But it was a hybrid. It wasn't the actual system running the code. It was a system running a web browser running JavaScript or some variant thereof. Now, a tvML app is kind of the same, but it's faster and its arrangement or what you can or can't do with it is still strongly dictated by Apple. So what it is you have a container. That's your basic app. And then your container, your basic app, goes off to your server and gets a JavaScript file, but a special Apple version of this JavaScript file, and returns it to the app and displays the content that it needs to display. Now, that's a very high-level overview, but more or less, that's what's happening. And I think you get this with Netflix, Hulu, these streaming-type services. And I don't mean that they go off and get just the titles of the items. They actually go off and get the layout of the app. So that way, the app can be updated, in air quotes, without the user having to update it in the App Store. So my take on this is that Apple are experimenting with it to provide more on-demand apps as mobile internet gets more ubiquitous. But of course, with tvOS, you're not mobile, so you're pretty much guaranteed to always have internet connected to it because it sits at home. So that's my take on that. We're not going to look at that for the moment. We're going to look at single view app because TVML apps, I would say, are more of a specialty when you have to change the content on a regular basis and the layout and feel of the app, like Netflix does. Then TVML is for you. So for now, we're just going to create a single view app. And what are we going to call this? Well, let's call this TV Color Test Bar, I think. Now, my rationale behind this name is it's based on a really old technology, which was when, I don't know if you recall it, but we used to get color bars on TVs that were broadcast before a channel started broadcasting, which, if you're young, then you don't know what that means. But I grew up in a small country in Africa, and TV started every day at 3 p.m., when I got back from school, usually. And before that, all you had was a color bar that was pretty much shown on TV with this horrible beeping sound that was just continuous, a continuous tone. And it was something, actually, this was pretty much it. The test card, the Common PAL test pattern. So it's that particular image that was broadcast, and we have a very simple version up here. So it tells us test cards contain a set of patterns to enable cameras and receivers to be adjusted to show the picture correctly. So who knows why they showed this on the TV, but I suspect some people would actually like to check the color functioning, the contrast, etc. of their TV, and I think this would be quite a useful thing for them to have. So all we're going to make is a very simple app that more or less embeds this image, and this image should be under the public domain. So we're free to actually use this as we wish. So let's expand that. There we go. Right click. And I'll just save that to my downloads. And you should do the same, but you can use any of these publicly available images if you like. And so to give you a little idea of how popular these plain images are, let's go to YouTube. Pause that so it doesn't play. It's had 15,000 views. I mean, that's pretty good. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in clinical psychology, follow this guy, Jordan Peterson. He's amazing. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, Grant. Okay, so now we have our image. We're going to show a TV color test bar. And perhaps TV color test and sound bar I wanted to have. But perhaps we'll just have color, TV color test bar. Yes, I think that's okay. Let's hit next. And of course, save it wherever you're going to save it. Okay. So what's the first thing that we have to do? Well, if you're brand new to iOS development, which I hope you're not if you're taking this course, you should have taken really my iOS starter courses first of all, at least before we start this, and probably even the bronze course, because tvOS is very, very similar to iOS, if not the same. First of all, just in case you're not familiar with this, and you can feel free to skip ahead, I'm just going to run through these files we've got here. We have, first of all, this folder, TV Color Test Bar. Then we have bar tests, bar UI tests, and products. We don't need to worry about these three folders for now. Our project is mostly going to live inside this top TV Color Test Bar. Now, the first file in there is an app delegate. And this file, it's a code file, as you can see. This is responsible for receiving commands from the tvOS system, and it's responsible for relaying your commands from between your app and the system. Okay, and this has a whole bunch of code in it that fires off, for example, when your application is going to enter the background. So when you hit the home button and your application is going to background, you can save something here if you wish. It does a whole lot more than that, but that's all you need to know for now. Then we have a view controller. Now, a view controller is something that controls a view. And this is typically any view that you have in your app will have a view controller behind it. This view controller in particular has no code in it. It only has these functions that are marked as override, which means they pre-exist inside of this view controller class. And when you override them, you can add your own custom code to it, which is something we're going to do a lot. Again, you should know this. Then we have this storyboard file, and the storyboard contains the actual layout of your app. And because it's Apple TV, it's actually horizontally laid out. And if we click this icon down at the bottom, View as Apple TV, you can only change light style and dark style. So you can choose between the two. There's no portrait mode here like you would have if you were developing for iOS. Just note that. And there's only one Apple TV. And generally speaking, it gets output at this widescreen aspect ratio. But that's something we have to deal with later on. Okay, next one, we have our assets. Assets simply contain images, app icons, launch images, etc. So if we expand the app icon, we can see that there's actually, if we click on them, there's nothing contained in these. If there was, then this section would be filled with the image in particular. So that's something we can come back to much later on. Then we have an info plist. And this is just a property list, hence the name plist, that contains all of the properties that enable our app to actually start up. So development language, we have the version of this dictionary that we're using, we have required device capabilities, and that's a processor type, so it needs a 64-bit processor. The main storyboard file name, so it knows where to go and load that first. Okay, and then we have this XC data model ID. Now what's that? That's something to do with core data, which is the database we created when we made this app. And how do we know we created it? Well, if we just create a new dummy app, and we won't go all the way with this, single view next, it's this, use core data. And core data is Apple's version of database data. So I have, again, covered this in my more advanced courses on iOS, and it's no different to tvOS. Right, so if you've done iOS stuff before, then this is all going to look very, very familiar to you. Thus far, we have our very basic tvOS app that doesn't actually show anything. So let's learn how to embed an image into our apps files, and then also how to show that image inside of an image view in tvOS. So open up Xcode and let's go. The very first step we have to take is actually add our image. And if you're familiar with iOS, you know that this goes in our assets.xc assets folder, or section rather. Click the little plus icon at the bottom, select a new image set, and let's call this something like test-1. Then all we have to do is simply drag in an image. And this should be the image that we had previously. Remember, we downloaded one from the internet that was copyright, and it was that test image. So it was this particular image, and that's what we're going to show on the screen. Okay, that's simple enough. Now let's go over to our main storyboard, and let's drop in something to show the image. So down in our object filter at the bottom right, we can select the special UI elements that we can drop in. Let's just search for image, and image view should show. And it tells you this displays a single image or an animation described by an array of images. Well, we're just going to show a single image, and we can drop that in there. Now, if you haven't done iOS programming before, what we're about to do is add some constraints to this, so this image view knows where to sit in the screen. So with the image view selected, and you can do that on screen or via this list at the left-hand side, select these little icons at the bottom, and you get some positioning options. So this one with the square allows you to position your element on the top, bottom, left, and right. So we actually want this to sit right all the way to the edges of the screen. And if you click Add 4 Constraints when you do that, you'll see that it moves over. But you'll also notice there is a slight gap at the top, and at the sides. And that's because this is applying a margin. So if we select the image view, we can actually inspect those margins, those constraints we just created. Over on the right-hand side, there's a little ruler at the top, which is the size inspector. And if you scroll down, it tells you all of the spaces that you currently have. So let's go through these one by one. Let's click Edit, and it tells you what the constraint is. Now, these constraints can also be negative. So I can put -20, press Enter, and you'll notice it moves across. I can even do -200, and it will move out of the screen. But that's very bad programming to get rid of margins, because margins can change from tvOS version to the new versions. So what we're going to do, select our image view, and we're going to double click our trailing space, and this gives us more options to change. So what we're going to do is click the first item, and you'll notice it tells us relative to margin. Well, if we unclick that, it actually puts a little constraint in, and we can click that at the value of the current margin. So if we change that to 0, that's going to pull everything across. And of course, we can do the same with the other side. So instead of selecting them from the list over on the right, you can actually select them in the storyboard editor. When you hover over one of these blue lines, this vertical one actually corresponds to the horizontal. So we'll click the vertical, and then we can change, in this case, our second item. The first item doesn't have a margin. It's the super view, that's the main view behind all of this, that has the margin. So we can click that off. We can change the constant for it to 0, so it goes all the way. And of course, we can do the same actions for everything else. So here, there appears to be no margin on the top one. That's very strange. Now, I wonder why that is. Actually, I don't know why that is. But as we're going to see, that might not matter when we run this on our simulator. Okay, so we've changed the side margins. Now we need to add an image to this image view. And we can do that in this section. So with the image view selected, go over to the Attributes Inspector at the top right. Go to the image box, and your populated image should be shown. Now, when it first drops in, it doesn't bother adjusting the image. It just squeezes it to fit. Okay, so what we're going to do here is change the content mode. And if you put aspect fit, it will fit it and give you some bars either side. You can also have aspect fill, which makes it zoom in. Now, it's totally up to you how you want to program this. Either aspect fit or aspect fill. I suspect people would be happier with aspect fill, or if you could find an image like this that wasn't actually square-ish, because this is a very old format size, then you might be okay, so to speak. So we'll just leave it at aspect fit right now, and we'll run this on our simulator. So up at the top left-hand corner, we have a simulator list. If you click it down, we have Apple TV 1080. If you don't have that, you can simply go to Window, Devices and Simulators, click on the Simulators tab, and you can add a simulator down here. So down at the bottom left, you can hit the plus, and you can select an Apple TV 1080p on any other tvOS. So let's cancel that and close that. Okay, and then to run that, simply hit play at the top left. And that's going to load your simulator, which will take quite a while the first time you do it. Okay, so mine has loaded, but we don't see our image. We just see what is effectively a blank image view. So if we click away from that back to Xcode, you'll notice down at the bottom we have an output. And it tells us we could not load the test1 image reference from blah-de-blah-de-blah. And all that means is that this image view can't find this particular image. Now, this is quite a common problem, and I suspect I know what it is. I don't know for sure, but I suspect. If we open up our Files tab and we go to our Assets folder, This test image, I think, is not actually loading. Now that could be due to the fact we've got lots of underscores and dashes here. So let's just call this test 1. And then let's also change the name of it here to test 1. Then let's drag in test 1 to here. Go back to our storyboard. And of course it can't find test-1, so now we have to change it to test 1. Now let's hit play, and it will reload it onto your tvOS simulator. And there we can see it running. And we still have nothing. Right, so what's going on here? Now, I know what's going on because I want to show you the trouble that you can have when you're loading images. And it's a source of frustration for beginners, so I thought I'd actually address it right here. In iOS, when you load up this 2x image, you generally are covered for all the devices you're going to run it on, because iOS will just look for the default image. But when it comes to tvOS, I have personally discovered that it doesn't like not having 1x and 3x. And 1x, 2x, and 3x actually refer to the resolutions of your devices that you're running on. So it actually counts the pixels per inch, if you like. So it's not really a resolution, it's a resolution per inch, the resolution density. So if we add that image to both 1 and 3x, and then we hit play, then we get to see our actual image. So that's brilliant. It shows on the screen. We do have margins at the top and bottom, which is a little bit unfortunate, I think. But if we stop that, we can go and investigate that. So let's click our image. We've got aspect fit. We've got a whole bunch of other stuff. So what we'll do is go to the size tab. Let's do the bottom or the top space. So if we double click that item, here you do have actually an option to do, let's say, -100, and that's going to shift it up, perhaps -80. And that's going to shift it up. Now, I don't think this is actually going to be too much of a problem with future devices, especially for this particular app. And the reason I say that is because the top and bottoms of this aren't actually very important. So if they go outside of the view, it doesn't really matter, at least in my book. So there, we've changed the top and bottom to negative margins. Now, it's a tricky thing to do, of course, because in the future that could change. But if your app's popular, you will be developing it for the next platforms and just changing stuff to make sure that it works. So at the moment, that's okay to do. So let's hit play. Let's go back to our Apple TV, and I'll show you one more thing before we end here. Right, so we have our image. It's filled up enough of the screen. Our user can test their screen with this image. Now, if you have an Apple TV, you'll know it comes with a remote. So if you click Hardware and show Apple TV Remote, you can also use Shift-Command-R to show it. There we have our TV remote. Press and hold the Option key to actually touch it, or press Menu. So press Option and drag your item release option. Then simply click it and it will show your app. Or you can press Home and go back. So that's how you use the simulator on tvOS, and it's also how we show the user an image. Now we're going to look at how we actually use the Apple TV remote, how our application actually receives the inputs that are coming from the remote. And then, depending on if we have enough time, either in this lecture or the next lecture, we'll look at how to actually change the image that we have depending on the remote input swipe. So let's see how it's done. Right, so the first step we have to take is inside of our view controller, because by default, this is actually receiving inputs from the remote control. Now, it's a bit tricky because if you've done iOS before, it's slightly different here. It helps not to think of the iOS or the tvOS remote control as a separate physical remote control. It helps to think of it more as the screen on your iOS device. So by default, you interact with your screen, and on tvOS, as opposed to iOS, by default, you interact with the remote control. So that means our programming life is made somewhat simpler to do. So all we have to do in these views is actually subscribe to the gestures that are coming through automatically. And we don't have to inherit from anything in here. We don't have to do anything special. So all we have to do is, let's swipe right equal to. Now we need what's called a UI swipe gesture recognizer. So this is going to fire something whenever a swipe is picked up. So hit enter on the autocomplete and let's start filling it out. So the target is self, which refers to this current view controller. Then what is the selector? Well, let's use some Objective-C-ish terminology. We're going to say, I want you to go look for a selector called swiped right. So it's going to go look in this class somewhere for that swiped right gesture. And where is that going to be? Well, let's create it. Function swiped right. And this is going to it's going to receive the gesture as one of its arguments. UI swipe gesture recognizer. And because we're using a throwback from the Objective-C days, we need to click this little icon, and it says argument of selector refers to instance method, yada yada, that is not exposed to Objective-C. So we can fix that, and Xcode will add an Objective-C to this. Okay, and I think this is the most common version of these selectors that you see around the internet. There are other ways of doing it, but we'll do it this way because it's a common one that's seen. Now we need to get our swipe right, and we need to add a direction. And obviously, this is going to be right. Then, once we're able to detect that right-hand side, we can then add it to self.view.add gesture recognizer, and we can give it the swipe right. Okay, so now it's ready and set up to go. It's going to fire this method. So let's send ourselves a little message called print swiped right. Let's save it. Let's go up to the top and click run. Let's run it on our simulator. And now we can swipe right. But just before we do that, let's make sure this little debug section down at the bottom is showing, because that's where we're going to see this swipe right. So if you press down Option whilst on the control and then swipe right, you'll notice that down at the bottom, we have swiped right every time we do it. But if we swipe left, obviously, we get absolutely nothing. Okay, so we can stop that running. And we've now basically interacted with our app, which is fantastic, obviously. Okay, now what if we want to swipe left? Because we want to change our image back. Well, you could copy this, and then you could say dot left here and call this swipe left, make a new function, etc. But that sounds like a lot of work. So what if we could just use that one gesture recognizer to go both left and right? So let's change the name of this to just swipe, and that to swipe, and that to swipe. And let's change the name of the selector to swiped, Let's go that way. And let's remove, actually, this direction. So now we should get a swiped, if we play this, in all the directions that we've added. And now we can start to experiment and see what we get. So I'm going to swipe right first. Swiped. Swipe left. It appears we have nothing. Swipe up, swipe down. I'll try right again. It's a bit finicky to get this working. Swipe left. Nothing. Down, up, right. So for some strange reason, right seems to work. Now that is very strange. Let's go to swipe.direction again. And let's see what we've got. Well, we've got everything we need. Down, left, right, and up. So if we added left, and then we play that, this is all just part of debugging your apps as to why these things happen. It's very strange. Hold down Option, swipe. Left, swiped, swiped, swipe right. It's really, really finicky to get this right. So left works, right doesn't work. That's very strange. Let's stop that running. Let's remove this direction again. Let's go down here to swiped. And then let's add a backslash, open and close brackets. And that means we can now get something, we can put a variable in here. What we're going to put in is this gesture. So we're going to say gesture dot direction. So it's going to give us a direction back with this, and it's going to make this into a string. This syntax makes it into a string for us. Now let's hit play, and let's experiment with this. So now we should get the directions that we've swiped in. So I'm going to try right. Swiped at raw value 1, so it doesn't give us the actual string, but just the raw value. Let's try left. That was right again. Left, let's try up. Let's try down. And so it doesn't seem to want to do that, which is a bit annoying. Thanks a lot, Apple. That means we actually need to add 2 swipe gestures onto here. Right, so let's have swipe.direction equal to .left. And we'll add that to our view. Then we'll do a little trick. We'll copy this, paste it underneath. We'll get a right recognizer, and we will also send that over. So all we're doing is we're changing this variable swipe, and in fact, we might want to make it a variable. And we're adding 2 directions to it. So here it's adding a left, here it's adding a right. Now, once this view did load has finished executing, this is going to be disposed of, right? Because it runs out of scope. And that means what this is doing is grabbing the swipe and creating its own instance of it in effect. Don't take my words as gospel, but that's more or less what it's doing. So now this function should operate for both the left and right that we've added in the separate cases. So let's play. Let's see if I'm correct here. So all I'm doing is trying to cut down the code that we repeat. So let's swipe. That was right. Let's swipe left. Come on. Okay, that didn't work. So let's stop that running. That was a rubbish idea. Let's call this swipe right. Let's copy that. Let's paste it. Let's call this swipe left. Right, so swipe right and swipe. Swiped right. Swiped right. And then we've got a left. Whoops. Left. Swipe left, dot direction, which is swipe left, So here we'll have swiped right. And then, unfortunately, we have to copy this, swiped left. Save it and hit Command R once you've double-checked your code. We'll change these to lets. The difference between let and var is let is a constant variable, whereas var expects to be changed or mutated at some point in the future. Right, now let's try it. Command, swipe right, or swiped left, swipe right. So I've mixed up my directions there. That's a bit silly. Because that needs to be right and that needs to be left. So let's retest that and we should be good to go. So it's a bit annoying, Apple, I'm talking to you, that we have to program this twice. So swipe right, swipe left. Of course, you can experiment with up and down if you want to and see what's going on there. But that's how we add basic gesture recognizers. Now, if you're looking for button taps, I'm not going to cover those right now. But we want a UI gesture recognizer with a tap on it. And that's probably a tap to do with your touchpad on the remote. Same with a long press that you have there. So just typing UI gesture will give you pretty much everything you need to know. And then you can just Google them if you're not sure how to implement them. But I've shown you the basic pattern, so you have all the tools you need for interacting with the remote. Right, so we've learned how to interact with tvOS through our Apple remote and how to receive those commands. What we're now going to do is change our images programmatically so that you can change the test image that's displayed on the screen via swipes on the remote. The first task we have to do is get another image for our app. So I've just put a color bar TV test in here. I'm going to hit search settings, or actually not search settings. I'm going to go tools, usage rights, labeled for reuse. So we can select any of these images. Let's select this first image. It's on Wikipedia, so it's more or less guaranteed to be available for our use. Hit plus, right click, save the image to downloads. All right, we have our second image. We can come back to our app. Now, what we're going to do is change the image in our image view in swiped right and swiped left. So we can leave these prints in for now, so they help us as a developer to debug what's going on if these don't work. But what we need here, first of all, is a reference to our image view. Now, it's not as easy as just typing image view, if only it were. If you've ever used Xamarin, which is a .NET platform for creating cross-platform apps, then they allow you to do that. They automatically register the UI variables, if you like, in the background so you can actually use them. But in Xcode, it's slightly different. We need to go to our main storyboard. We need to hit these two circles at the top right, which is called the Assistant Editor. And then we need to press Control, not Command, but Control, click the image view and drag over to this side. And then we need to drop it in outside of any of these functions. And we need to give it a name. And what this is doing is it's called outletting. It's giving us an outlet, a link over to our image view. And when you click connect, we'll just close this and go to our view controller. This is what's created. An @IB outlet, which is weak, so it can be disposed of easily in our memory collections. That's important to know. We have a variable image view. And you have this little gray icon at the side. And if you click it, it tells you where this is connected to in our main storyboard. Now, if we scroll down, we can use this image view. And we can set the image for it. So type image. It'll tell you, you can have highlighted images. You've got a whole ton of options here. But we just want to make this the image equal to a UI image. Open your brackets. And you've got a whole ton of ways of creating a UI image. So we want the one named string. And what this is going to do, in quotes, is find name dash of dash image inside of our assets folder. Right? So let's go to our assets folder. This image is test1. Let's create another one for our new image. Let's click the name once, type test2, and then let's drop in that image. So I'm going to rename this to test2. Now, generally with images in iOS, tvOS, etc., PNGs, portable network graphics, are the preferred image format I've found, because you can have transparency in them and iOS can deal with those transparencies for you. So if you ever run into some strange white backgrounds with strange shadows, check your original files. Anyway, we're going to drag those into 1, 2, and 3. Now, there was a time when I would have changed the resolution for each image to match the screen that it's running on. But since we've hit the sort of the Retina display age, as long as your images are high enough resolution, there's more than enough processing power to show them to the user from all of these 1, 2, and 3 times resolutions. I really don't worry about that anymore. But if it's a concern for you, then there's this great piece of software called Asset Catalog Creator. It's definitely worth paying for the Pro version. So here is on the Mac App Store. And what this does is it creates all kinds of image sets for you. The app icon, the launch screens for tvOS, for iOS, for watchOS, everything that you need. It's fantastic. And I'm not affiliated with this guy. Oh wait, there is no tvOS. There probably will be. He'll do it at some point because it gets updated fairly often. But I can recommend this for sure if you need image sets and app icon sets. Anyway, coming back. Let's go to, now that we have test2 image, let's go to our view controller. If we swipe right, we can type in test2. We can copy this. And if we swipe left, we can have test1. We can save this and hit play. Here we go. So we've got our image. Let's swipe right. We have a new image. Swipe left. There we go. Very neat. And very quick as well. I mean, there's a lot of processing power available in these Apple TVs. Right, so that's basically how you change an image programmatically using your swipe gestures. But that's the key line there, how to pull out your image. Now, if you get this name wrong, let's play this. I'm going to show you what happens. It's a deadly trap waiting. So hit Option, swipe right. We have nothing. So no image actually appears on that. And you don't really get a warning as a developer. So let's stop that, save that. Okay, so that's how we do image changing. So far we have an app that we can change the image of, which makes it nice and simple for the user to understand what's going on. But let's add a little cream on top, because if the user swipes on the screen, they have no way of knowing that there's actually an image that's next. They would have to swipe to discover it, which is fairly unlikely. Swiping left and right is the most common gesture, but it's pretty unlikely they'd do it. They'd assume you're just showing an image. Right, so what we're going to do is just add a little cream on top. We're going to give the user a little on-screen inducement to swipe left and right, depending on which image they've currently selected. Okay, so simply enough, we have just 2 images, and that makes our task pretty easy. Let's go to our main storyboard. And what we can do is let's search for, perhaps we can search for a button if we want. And we could drop a button in. But a button implies that a user has to navigate to that button and then click it to show a different image. But we've kind of gotten past that. We can just do it with a swipe. So you can select that button and you can press backspace to delete it. What we actually want to do is just show perhaps another image view that has a little indicator showing the user to go left or right depending on which image we're currently showing. So in order to do that, we need to make some space here. So let's select our existing image view and let's make some space on both the left and right hand side. Perhaps we will make about 50. That's kind of small. Let's do 100. So you've got to imagine this in a very large scale. Let's do 150. And let's do the same over on the other side. Okay, so now we can insert yet another image view on either side of the current image view. So I'm going to drop one in here and drop one in here. Now let's zoom in a little and scroll over. We have to constrain these. So what I'm going to do is just give it a rough constraint. And when you use, when you use those icons at the side, that's not actually constraining it. It's just helping you position it. You can position it to the side in the center. I'm going to give this image view a fixed width and height. I'm going to make it square, 127 perhaps. And then what are we going to do? And you'll notice it's given these little items on the sides indicating a width and height, but they're red because it's not fully constrained in its position yet. It doesn't know where it should be. So control click and drag from it to the main view. So you can select it in the list if you want, and you can select a leading space to container. And then you can also position this vertically in the center. So with the image view selected, select vertically in container and add one constraint. So when everything turns blue, it's fully constrained, it knows where it should be. Let's just make sure this doesn't overlap with the current image view. No, I don't think it does. Okay, then we can scroll over to the other side. And we can do the same on this side. So we can add a width and a height, 127, 127, add them. Let's just shift it across for now. Control click and drag to the main view, trailing space to container, because that's the right-hand side space, and vertical centering. So now we have two image views either side that can hold an image. Right. So what image are these going to hold? Well, they're going to hold separate images. So let's go over to Google Images and search for arrows left, right. And we want labeled for reuse so we don't have copyright issues. And totally up to you. You can select something like this arrow. Or actually, I like this one. That's pretty nice. It would be ideal if we had both pairs. So let's click View More. So we don't have to mirror them ourselves, but we can do that. It's not that much of an issue. Right, let's select this first one. Let's right-click it. And, oh, this is an SVG, which is a vector format. So let's see what else we've got. Oh, we want labeled for reuse. Let's select this arrow. It's an SVG. This one, SVG. Oh, this is getting painful, isn't it? Well, let's try an SVG. Let's right-click, save image to downloads. And then let's go to our assets. Let's put a new image set to go left, because that's the way that image was. Let's go to our Finder. Let's go to Image, and let's just call this left. This has saved it as a PNG, which is pretty handy. So we can drop that in to all the resolutions. Okay, and then let's create a right arrow. So double-click left, it will open preview. What you can do is actually edit this. So we can rotate this twice using this icon at the top. And then we can file. We can save as, I would have thought, but perhaps we have to actually export this as a PNG to write. Drop it into downloads and save. And then we can quit that and go pick it up from our downloads. And sometimes you'll notice it doesn't actually give you the file extension. So put a .png on it to be sure. Then let's create a new image set. Click the name once to write. And drop in 3 of those. Right, we've got our images sorted. Let's go to our storyboard. Let's select the left image view. Let's select its attributes, top right, and hit left. And of course, the same with the right. So now we've got our images sorted. Now we should actually link these to our main coding file. So open up the assistant editor. And if it's a bit cramped, you can turn off these icons at the top, which give you more space to work with. So control, click and drag. Somewhere at the top is always best. Left image view. And of course, right image view. And if you just press enter, it does it for you. Right, let's turn off the assistant editor. Let's put our sidebars back on. That's top right icon. And go back to our view controller. Right, so we've got our right and left sorted. Now, when our app first loads, what we want to do is make the left image view disappear because we can't actually swipe left. So let's create a function for it. Function change image alpha. Now, the alpha of an image is the opacity of an image. So can we see through it, or is it opaque so we can see all of it? And this ranges from 0 to 1. So 0 means an image is invisible. It's still there, but it's invisible on screen. And alpha of 1 means it's completely there. So in this change image alpha function, we actually want to pass over the image view, which is of type image view. And we want to say what the alpha is. And this, I believe, is a CG float type from memory. Right, so then all we have to do is say image view dot alpha is equal to alpha. And that's going to apply this alpha to this image view we pass over. So now we have one single function that's going to take care of all of the changing of our image alphas if we need it. Okay, so that's pretty handy. Then what are we going to do? Well, first we have to make the left disappear. And this is going to happen when we first load, because when we first load, we are showing the first image in our list. So what did I call it? It was change image alpha. And this is going to be the left image view. And the alpha is going to be 0. That means we're going to make it disappear, right? Then we're going to swipe right. And once we've actually swiped right, again, we're going to call change image alpha, and we're going to make the left one now appear. And this is going to be an alpha of 1. And we're going to make the right one disappear. An alpha of 0. And then we can copy these 2 lines. And we can paste them into swiped left. And we can swap these values around. So 0 and 1. So there's a bit of logic for our app. Now let's hit play on our Apple TV. And there we have our right image view. So let's swipe right. And we have our left. If we swipe right again, nothing happens. We get our little message down at the bottom. which our user never sees, of course. Then let's swipe left, and we get our arrows in the correct direction. Swipe right, swipe left. Now, it's not that pretty as it stands. We could add animations to this if we wanted to, but I think it stands pretty much as it is because we have a very basic functioning application. We can swipe left and right, and the user can actually adjust the contrast and brightness and whatever they want to adjust on their TV. So that is pretty much this app complete. And it's a great example of how simple you can make apps, but this might actually be very useful to someone who takes out a color chart that's in that format of these images and wants to adjust their TV to make it look like their color chart. So it's actually quite an important function for some people, probably, to have these colors on there. And we could optionally put an advertising bar just at the bottom here, not being very intrusive, so that we can earn a little bit of income from when a user loads this app up. Okay, that's our app pretty much done.